And now, a reading of Dark Sector 0, written by David Wohl, illustrated by David Sienkiewicz. There was a time when working for the agency was something to be proud of, something that people respected and admired. The world was a different place then. We knew who our friends and enemies were and how to tell them apart. And most importantly, we were the good guys. We were always the good guys. We kept the world safe from corrupt kings and brutal warlords, from despots and demagogues. Then the world changed. The lines blurred. Things got messy. We used to be the team they called in when trouble had to be put down. The black ops, off-the-charts element that was responsible for taking out the trash and scrubbing the bloodstains off the walls. We were sent to Chernobyl, and were there for the Bay of Pigs fiasco. But nothing compares to Lazaria. With its picturesque countrysides and progressive government, the Republic of Lazaria was once the pride of Eastern Europe, enjoying hundreds of years of peace and prosperity, even as the nations that surrounded it endured centuries of wars, occupations, and violent upheavals. But in May of 1941, the nation's tranquility was shattered as the Axis powers marched in and quickly dismantled Lazaria's scant defenses. As World War II drew to a close, the citizens cheered as their Russian liberators rolled through the streets. But their happiness was short-lived as they realized that the only difference between the Nazi and Soviet occupations was the color of the uniforms. For the next several decades, Lazaria languished under Soviet rule. Since it had a port city, it was considered a strategically vital location, but otherwise it was a fairly unremarkable place. Until one fateful day in 1987, when the infection struck. Nobody knew where it came from or who to blame. At first we thought it was a Soviet experiment gone awry. It wouldn't have been the first time. This was, after all, the peak of the Cold War, and both sides were looking for any edge. And no one ever considers the consequences of playing God. Just ask Robert Oppenheimer. In retrospect, I doubt the Soviets had anything to do with the 87 infection. They were just too surprised, too unprepared. According to our intelligence, it took them weeks to even understand the basics, how it attacked the body, how it was transmitted, how deadly it was. By the time the Soviet scientists were just beginning to comprehend what they were dealing with, dozens of people were already dead. But others weren't quite so lucky. Scientists quickly realized that with this infection, death was only one possible outcome. If the victim survived the initial attack, the illness didn't subside. It continued to attack its host's DNA, until finally a shocking change occurred. It was by far the most efficient means of disease transmission ever created, and before long Lazaria was overrun. When Moscow learned of this unknown phenomenon that had engulfed Lazaria, it immediately dispatched soldiers to contain the carnage. They probably attacked everything that moved, and far more people were killed than would have been necessary. Intelligence is extremely sketchy on what happened next, since the Soviets had no intention of publicizing what was occurring there. What we have determined is that the outbreak was ultimately contained, and satellite imagery showed at least one low-level nuclear detonation occurring in or around Lazaria at that time. The connection between those two events has never officially been acknowledged. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Russians continued to deny anything ever happened in Lazaria. But once in a while, behind closed doors and far off the record, one of their spooks would make an offhand comment about it, usually followed with a claim that we were responsible. Now, I probably would chalk that up to good old-fashioned Cold War paranoia if I didn't know what we were capable of. If I didn't know everything we have done in the service of our country. The truth is, even if we did, in fact, create it, nobody involved has ever stepped up to take responsibility, not even to those of us with Omega security clearance. Which is unfortunate, because we've recently received some extremely unsettling reports from our agents in Lazaria. This time nobody is denying it. The virus is back. The agency sent a team, led by Commander Robert Messner, into the sector. We thought we'd have trouble recruiting people for such a dangerous mission, but Messner volunteered, unfortunately. I was hoping anyone else would step up. A brilliant scientist, Messner always did put knowledge and discovery before his own safety, or the safety of others. At first, he and his team seemed to be making progress, but then they abruptly fell off the grid. We haven't heard a word from any of them in weeks. And the little intelligence I do get from the other agents on the ground just doesn't make any sense. It says that the victims of the virus have transformed somehow, become monstrous, and worse, they may be self-organizing. Now I can only hope that Messner isn't dead or infected. Or, of course, option 3. Messner always was a loose cannon. I wouldn't put it past him to have his own agenda over there. The priority now is finding him, and the task is in the hands of, God help us, another loose cannon, Messner's former protege, Hayden Tenno. Tenno was a major asset for the agency, but his psych profile was altered dramatically after a recent mission. The incident forced us to lock him away, toss the key. I never thought we'd need to turn to him again. But he's more familiar with Messner than anyone, so he knows how high the stakes are, and that getting to him will be no picnic. If he has turned, Messner will undoubtedly try to recruit Tenno. We've tried to inoculate him from the virus, but when it's all around him, we have no idea if his resistance will hold. All we can do now is sit and wait, counting on Hayden to complete his mission. But I have an awful feeling that the trouble is only beginning.